Before we start, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you won't miss any new videos. You think you know Italy? The Colosseum, pizza, and Venice standing on sinking wooden piles. But imagine a country where people were still living in caves with donkeys as late as the 1950s, where the world's oldest university has been run by students for over 900 years, where a lake disappears every winter and reveals the bones of soldiers, and where concrete poured by the Romans 2,000 years ago keeps getting stronger. Imagine a country where the law forbids buildings taller than a cathedral dome, and where the national gold reserve is protected by referendum. This is not alternative history. This is the real Italy, the one postcards never show you. And now I'm going to reveal 15 of its darkest, strangest, and greatest secrets. Buckle up, popes in armor, female gladiators, and pizza used as a political weapon are only the beginning. Fact 2. Female gladiators really existed, and the Senate banned them because of the moral decay of the aristocracy. In 200 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus issued an edict banning women of all social classes from fighting in arenas. But for nearly a century before that, gladiatrices were a sensational form of entertainment. The first reliable references date back to Nero's reign, 54 to 68 AD, when women from noble families fought during games in Pompeii. The poet Martial described a battle in which a woman named Achillia killed a lion. The most famous evidence is a marble relief from Halicarnassus, modern Bodrum, Turkey, showing two gladiatrices named Amazon and Achillia fighting with swords and shields. They are depicted with short hair and bare chests like male gladiators, but barefoot instead of wearing sandals. Why were they banned? Contemporary writers claimed senators and knights were losing fortunes betting on female fights, while some noble women secretly hired trainers and practiced in underground schools. Septimius Severus, a former soldier himself, considered this a threat to traditional Roman morality. Curiously, the ban did not apply to slave gladiatrices. They continued fighting in provincial games until the late 3rd century, though very few records survive. Fact 3. The University of Bologna invented the word student and still follows a constitution from 1158. The word student comes from the Latin studens, meaning one who strives or one who studies diligently, and it entered common use in Bologna. But the real miracle was the university charter granted by Emperor Frederick Barbarossa in 1158. This document, called Habita, declared students free from local courts. Only professors or bishops could judge them. No city magistrate was allowed to arrest a student for debt. As a result, Bologna became almost a city-state within a city. Students lived under their own laws, maintained their own cemeteries, and even had their own churches. Most astonishing of all, students hired the professors themselves. Every year, a council of senior students decided teachers' salaries, fined professors for missing lectures, and could even dismiss them if they taught too slowly. In response, professors sometimes went on strike and moved to other cities. In 1222, for example, dissatisfied scholars founded the University of Padua. Female students first appear in records from the 1230s. The most famous, Betigia Gozzadini, lectured on law in the 1290s. After her death, however, women's education was largely halted for 2 centuries. Today, the university archives still contain 13th century meeting notes complaining that Professor Guglielmo of Brescia arrives late to the 3rd bell and lectures in a boring manner. Fact 4. Beneath Venice lies not just piles, but an entire underwater forest preserved forever in an oxygen-free environment. When tourists think of Venice, they imagine canals and gondolas. But beneath every palace, beneath St. Mark's Square, beneath the Rialto Bridge, lies a forest driven up to 12 meters into the mud. Builders mainly used larch and oak. Larch proved ideal because its resin polymerized when exposed to water, turning the wood into a stone-like material. Oak became incredibly hard, but also extremely heavy, making it suitable for foundation bases. The construction process was astonishing. Workers first laid a layer of stone on the lagoon floor, often imported from Istria, then drove vertical piles deep into the mud, cut them off about a meter above water level, and covered them with horizontal logs and stone slabs. The Doge's Palace alone stands on 25,000 piles. The Basilica of Santa Maria della Salute rests on 1,200,000. In the 1960s, restorers examining the Accademia Bridge recovered a pile driven in 1588. Laboratory tests revealed its density exceeded that of modern M200 concrete, while its resin content had risen to 32%, compared to just 12% in fresh larch. Even stranger, roots continued growing underwater. In the 1970s, divers found living alder roots at a depth of 8 meters, pushing through masonry, breathing through microscopic pores in the stone. Biologists still study this phenomenon today. Fact 5. Pizza Margherita was a diplomatic gesture in the battle against French cuisine. In 1889, the Italian royal court grew tired of French chefs and complicated sauces. Queen Margherita, young and curious, heard about a people's food sold on the streets of Naples: pizza. She requested it at the Royal Capodimonte Palace. Raphael Esposito, owner of the Pizzeria Pietra, still operating today, was invited to prepare 3 varieties. One was Mastanicola with cheese and basil, another was marinara with garlic and oregano, and the third combined red tomatoes, white mozzarella, and green basil. The Queen reportedly called it beautiful as the flag. But the gesture was political. Northern Italians at the time despised Neapolitans as lazy and dirty, while French cuisine was considered the height of sophistication. By publicly eating pizza, the Queen demonstrated that Italian folk food deserved a place at the royal table. A year later, Esposito received an official thank you letter and a certificate bearing the royal crown. Even more fascinating, the tomatoes used were the San Marzano variety grown in volcanic soil near Mount Vesuvius, unavailable in America at the time. The mozzarella came from the milk of black buffalo introduced to Italy by Arabs in the 9th century. In one dish, pizza united the New World tomatoes, the Middle Ages buffalo, and the Risorgimento, the Italian flag. Fact 6. Roman roads were the first in the world to include toll sections, and there was even a horseshoe tax. The Appian Way, built in 312 BC, was called the Queen of Roads for good reason. It was 4.2 meters wide, enough for 2 wagons to pass side by side. Its surface consisted of 5 layers: sand, gravel, concrete mixed with volcanic ash, paving slabs, and finally polygonal basalt blocks with grooves for wheels. But few people know about the financial side of Roman roads. Along the routes stood mutations, horse-changing stations, and mansions, roadside inns. Crossing bridges and tunnels often required payment. The Praetorium toll amounted to 1 to 2% of the cargo's value. Crossing the Tiber was especially expensive. The Aemilius Bridge charged copper asses for every wheel. There was even a special tax called the calcarium for chariots with iron-rimmed wheels because they damaged pavements. Emperor Vespasian, famous for taxing public toilets, also introduced a donkey road tax. Every driver paid 1 denarius for every 50 miles traveled. Romans even invented road signs for illiterate travelers. Stone markers displayed carved symbols: a bed for an inn, a horse's head for a stable, a jug for water. The most complete example was found in Pompeii. It indicates the distance to Nola, 27 miles, and shows symbols for hot food and baths. Fact 7. The Italian language only became widespread because of television and movies with subtitles for Italians themselves. When Italy unified in 1861, 97.5% of the population did not speak what would later become Standard Italian. Official statistics show that out of 25 million inhabitants, only around 600,000, mostly priests, notaries, and professors, spoke literary Tuscan. Soldiers from Sicily sent north to fight Austria often could not understand commands. Generals switched to French instead. In 1868, Education Minister Emilio Broglio told Parliament, "We have a country, but we do not have a national language." The first real breakthrough came in 1954 when the state broadcaster RAI launched the nightly program Non è mai troppo tardi, It's Never Too Late. Hosted by teacher Alberto Manzi, the show taught adults to read and write live on television. By 1960, 1.5 million people had gained elementary education through TV lessons. The funniest part came in cinemas. During the 1950s, films made in Neapolitan or Venetian dialect often carried subtitles in literary Italian because audiences from other regions could not understand them. Even in the 1970s, comedian Roberto Benigni spoke with such a strong Tuscan accent that some films were dubbed for Sicilian audiences. To this day, members of the Italian Parliament are officially allowed to speak in any dialect, although from 1990 to 2020, nobody used the privilege. Fact 8. The Sicilian Vespers massacre may have been orchestrated by Byzantine spies. For centuries, historians believe the Sicilian uprising of March 30th, 1282, began spontaneously. But modern scholars at the University of Palermo discovered letters in Constantinople archives written by Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos. Byzantium wanted to weaken the French King Charles of Anjou, who threatened Constantinople. So agents were allegedly sent to Sicily. Weeks before Easter, rumors spread across the island. When the bells ring for Vespers, kill the French. The mastermind was likely Giovanni de Procida, a Sicilian nobleman and physician to King Manfred. But events spiraled out of control. After a French sergeant named Drouet roughly searched a Sicilian woman named Ilaria near the Church of the Holy Spirit, the mob did not stop at one victim. They slaughtered every Frenchman they could find. Within an hour, more than 400 French people were dead in Palermo alone. The bells themselves were not intended as a battle signal. They were merely the regular evening prayer call. But villagers hearing the screams interpreted them as a command to rise. Within 6 weeks, the revolt engulfed the entire island. French residents were identified by their pale skin and pronunciation. Sicilians stressed the first syllable of the word Cicerai, chickpeas, while the French stressed the second. Those who pronounced it incorrectly were often killed on the spot. Historians estimate that out of 13,000 French residents in Sicily, only about 200 survived, mostly those hidden by local monks. Sicily then passed under Aragonese rule for the next 440 years. Fact 9. Pope Julius II fought wars in armor and sold indulgences to buy cannons. The Renaissance produced several warrior popes, but none more extreme than Julius II, who ruled from 1503 to 1513. He conquered cities like a mercenary commander. In 1506, he personally led 500 Swiss guards into Perugia, and in 1511 he directed artillery during the siege of Mirandola. One engraving even shows him standing in full armor with a sword, while cardinals carry his papal tiara behind him. To finance his wars, Julius II sold church offices and indulgences, practices that would later outrage Martin Luther. One of his orders reportedly declared, "Sell forgiveness of sins for the price of a good arquebus." His real name was Giuliano della Rovere. He became pope after the notorious reign of Alexander VI Borgia, famous for poisoning cardinals during banquets. Julius hated the Borgias and ordered their coat of arms melted down. Yet he also commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling and Raphael to decorate the Vatican rooms. When Michelangelo complained about working conditions and lack of payment, Julius allegedly threatened to throw him off the scaffolding. In response, the artist later portrayed the Pope in the Last Judgment as Saint Bartholomew holding flayed skin, a dark joke, considering Bartholomew was the patron saint of butchers. Julius too died in 1513 from a fever contracted during yet another military siege. Fact 10. Matera was a cave city inhabited since the Neolithic Age, and some emigrants even moved to Soviet Armenia. The Sassi di Matera are not just caves, but an entire city carved into soft volcanic rock. The first settlements date back to 700 BC. By the 20th century, however, the area had become a symbol of extreme poverty. In 1950, around 15,000 people still lived inside caves. Families of 10 squeezed into single 12-square-meter rooms, sleeping on straw beside donkeys, which served as both transportation and a source of warmth, and chickens for eggs and feathers. There was no sewage system. Waste flowed through channels into the streets. Water came from rain-collecting cisterns, where dead animals were often found. Infant mortality reached 50% due to malaria, brucellosis, and typhus. In 1952, the government ordered everyone relocated into modern housing. Over 10 years, 3,500 apartments were built, though many elderly residents refused to leave the caves, saying, "I will die where I was born." An unexpected chapter came in the 1920s and 1930s, when emigrants from Matera moved not only to the United States, but also to the Soviet Union. Italian communists traveled to help build Magnitogorsk. In 1933, 40 families from Matera founded a collective farm in the Armenian SSR near Gyumri, called Italianka. Descendants with surnames like Materazzi and Sassini still live in Armenia today. Today, Matera's caves contain luxury hotels with heated floors and jacuzzis. In 2019, the city welcomed 3.5 million tourists. On some cave walls, fascist-era graffiti reading Viva il Duce still survives beside 12th-century Christian frescoes. Fact 11. Roman concrete heals itself and continues to grow stronger, something modern technology still cannot fully reproduce. When researchers from Berkeley and MIT studied Roman concrete samples from the Portus Harbor breakwater built under Emperor Claudius in 42 AD, they made a shocking discovery. Tiny cracks inside the concrete were filled with crystals of tobermarite, a mineral that laboratories normally create only at temperatures above 150 degrees Celsius and under enormous pressure. In Roman concrete, it formed naturally. The secret lay in hot lime mixing. Romans did not slake lime beforehand like modern builders do. Instead, they combined quicklime with volcanic ash and tuff, then added water directly. The resulting chemical reaction generated intense heat, forming layered crystals that shifted rather than cracked during earthquakes, sealing fractures from within. Scientists also discovered aluminum in the concrete, introduced through volcanic ash. When exposed to seawater, it reacted to create the self-healing tobermarite crystals. Modern concrete usually lasts 50 to 100 years before steel reinforcement corrodes. Roman concrete contained no steel at all, yet many Roman structures have survived in seawater for 2,000 years. In 2017, scientists partially reproduced the recipe in a lab. The resulting material was 20% stronger than modern concrete, but required 6 months and temperatures of 70 degrees Celsius. Romans apparently achieved similar results directly on construction sites within a week. Fact 12. Rome's building height law exists because of Mussolini and the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. In 1939, the fascist regime passed a law banning any building taller than the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, which rises 136.57 meters. Officially, the law honored religion. In reality, it emerged from a clash between Benito Mussolini and the Vatican. Mussolini planned to build a massive 200-meter triumphal arch in the new Euro district of southern Rome as a symbol of fascism. The Vatican Secretary of State fiercely opposed the idea, warning, "You are about to build a tower that will overshadow the dome of the Apostle Peter." Facing threats of excommunication, Mussolini backed down. Still, in 1942, he constructed the so-called Square Colosseum, the Palazzo della Civiltà Italiana, at exactly 68 meters, half the forbidden height. After World War II, the law remained in place, with an additional clause banning secular buildings inside the Aurelian walls from exceeding the Basilica dome. There are exceptions. On certain hills, such as Janiculum and Pincio, greater heights are allowed because the dome still dominates the skyline from sea level. The most amusing case involved Rome's tallest skyscraper, the Eurosky Tower condominium. In 2014, a court ordered its spire shortened by 17 meters. The owners were fined €500,000 and forced to cut off the top. Florence has an even stricter law. Construction cranes visible above Brunelleschi's dome can also trigger fines. Fact 13. Italy's gold reserve is a political time bomb. Italy officially holds 2,451.8 tons of gold, according to the Bank of Italy's 2023 data. Its value is estimated at around €150 billion. The gold is not stored in one place. 1,199 tons lie beneath Rome on Via Nazionale under 3-meter-thick concrete slabs. Another 300 tons are kept in vaults at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, while the rest are stored in Basel and at the Bank of England. Every year, a 10-member commission opens the vaults and inspects the bars with ultrasound scanners. Each bar carries a unique serial number and purity stamp. What makes the reserve politically explosive is Italian law. The nation's gold cannot be sold without a nationwide referendum. The law was passed in 1981 after Prime Minister Bettino Craxi proposed selling 200 tons to help reduce public debt. Rumors of the plan sparked demonstrations in Rome, Naples, and Milan, where protesters carried signs reading, "Our gold is our freedom." Since then, politicians periodically suggest selling reserves to cover budget deficits, and every time opponents accuse them of selling the national heritage. Economists estimate that if Italy dumped all its gold onto the global market, prices could fall by 20% within hours. Yet despite yearly security and insurance costs of roughly €50 million, the country continues to guard its bullion. Fact 14. The first opera was essentially a pagan ritual, and its poet nearly faced persecution as a follower of Giordano Bruno. On October 6, 1600, Florence's Pitti Palace hosted the premiere of Eurydice for the wedding of Maria de' Medici and King Henry IV of France. The music was written by Jacopo Peri, with a libretto by Ottavio Rinuccini. An earlier opera called Daphne had existed in 1598, but its music was lost, making Eurydice the oldest surviving opera. Its story was based entirely on the pagan myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Pope Clement VIII attended the performance and did not object because Renaissance thinkers often interpreted classical myths allegorically. However, Rinuccini was a disciple and admirer of Giordano Bruno, who had been burned by the Inquisition earlier that same year for heresy after claiming the universe was infinite and filled with countless worlds. Rinuccini publicly defended Bruno, and after the premiere, he was summoned to the Vatican. He escaped punishment only because the Duke of Tuscany intervened, saying, "A poet is not a theologian, but an entertainer." Even so, Rinuccini never wrote another libretto. The opera itself was considered odd at the time. It contained no arias, only some dialogue accompanied by lute and harpsichord. Wedding guests reportedly whispered and grew bored. Modern opera truly emerged 37 years later in Venice, when Claudio Monteverdi added arias, choruses, and a 40-instrument orchestra. In 1637, the world's first public opera house, San Cassiano, opened its doors. Admission cost 4 lire, roughly the price of a serving of wine. Women were finally allowed to sing on stage instead of castrati, causing Venetian monks to demand the theater's closure. Fact 15. Lake Redonda is a ghost lake that disappears and reappears with the bones of World War I soldiers. High in the Italian Dolomites, at an altitude of 1,450 meters, lies the mysterious Lago di Redonda. It exists only during summer. By late August, the water begins draining through karst sinkholes, and by October the lake vanishes completely. At the bottom remain deep depressions and traces of World War I. Between 1915 and 1918, this area marked the border between Italy and Austria-Hungary. Italians dug 3 kilometers of tunnels into Mount Cal di Lana, while Austrian troops built barracks in the basin where the lake now forms. In 1917, massive artillery bombardments triggered rock slides that blocked the natural drainage system. Water flooded the basin, submerging Austrian positions. 34 soldiers, horses, and field kitchens sank beneath the lake. In the 1920s, when the lake first disappeared after the war, locals discovered rifles, helmets, and bones on the dry lake bed. Divers exploring the site in the 1970s found ammunition crates, medical tools, and even fragments of an Austrian flag at depths of 15 meters. The lake's depth changes dramatically, from 5 to 32 meters, depending on glacial melt. During drought years such as 2003, 2012, and 2022, the lake sometimes fails to appear at all, allowing visitors to walk across the exposed bottom among rusted cannons. Local guides tell stories of groans and shovel sounds echoing across the empty basin during foggy nights. Geologists attribute the noises to shifting rocks, but tourists remain uneasy. Since 2015, the lake has been protected as a military memorial. Removing any object from its bed, even a shell casing, can result in a €10,000 fine and prison time for looting. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like. Write in the comments which country you want to see next, and what facts you're most curious about. See you in the next episode.